If you are an event planner or meeting professional looking for a powerful speaker for your upcoming event, meet Bert Oliva. Great speakers have two qualities. They are very dynamic, and they give the audience emotional impact.
I truly believe that we all have greatness inside of us. The only person that holds us back is basically ourselves. To change people's lives in a positive way and give proven tools and techniques, not just a rah-rah. We've come up with concepts and techniques that actually help people find their true potential and help them bring it out.
Full of information, techniques, and powerful messages.
First of all, I didn't think I was going to do it. It was pretty exciting and it was fun, and I did it.
I'm amazed at what you have done to have been able to influence millions of people around the world.
Make it happen.
We're making it happen.
It challenged me as the leader of the city.
Bert uses his own experiences to share his stories, both failures and triumphs.
Motivational speakers. There's a need for them. People are looking for that edge, you know?
And you know who's going to get us there?
You tell me.
Bert Oliva.
Hi, Bert.
Oliva.
Bert Oliva.
Okay, let's go.
Considered the voice of inspiration and motivation. Today he'll pass his knowledge on to all of us.
His speeches and trainings focus on communication.
It's not even speaking, it's more about communicating with people.
Leadership.
Let them make a movie after you, because you're that great.
People skills.
Long-term goal? To change the lives of 100 million people in a positive way.
Bert uses his professional platform to give back to communities around the world.
What are you going to do? Make it happen!
Seems as if Bert had been working with them forever.
When Bert grabs an audience, he captures them and takes them through a roller coaster experience.
The thing I love about Bert is he's on stage and he gives his heart every single time.
I highly recommend him to any type of group. I love it.
We spend too much time letting life guide us. My name is Bert Oliva. Live life and don't let life live you. You guys want more? Yeah. Good, because I got some more for you.
Bang, bang! That's what I'm talking about.
Uplift, inspire, and rekindle the spirit of your audience. Bert Oliva Keynotes.
As I travel around the world, I get to meet what I call global gems. These are people who use their potential to make a difference in this world. They're on a journey to help others, teach us methods to better our lives, or share their wealth of knowledge with us. Neil is a renowned authority on generation and social change in America. He is also an acclaimed speaker and the nation's leading thinker of today's generation. Who they are, what motivates them, and how they will shape America's future. Neil also co-authored best-selling book Generations with William Strauss. Please help me welcome my friend and expert historian, Neil Howe.
Strengths and weaknesses, it's important to know what your strengths are. And it's important to know that's part of the coming of age experience. The whole rite of passage into adulthood is finding out where you stand, relative to other people. This is part of the great division of labor, right? Where can I contribute the most, right? And you don't know that. You grow up alone, you grow up, in your own little household. It's only when you go out and meet your peers. And so coming of age really is, and this is actually important for generational formation, right? Because that's when you go out and meet all your peers and you react to all your peers and you figure out where you stand among your peers. And in that process, you also figure out what distinguishes you from your parents for the first time, right? In that process, you figure out, I have these real strengths. Now, sometimes you are adamant about pursuing something that you're not very good at. And, that's could be a tough road for you, right? Those relative strengths, that's where you can contribute the most. That's where you'll have the most value added. But again, once you figure that out, it's working on your weaknesses that actually propel you forward. Weaknesses, really, by that I just mean limitations. The things that are limiting you.
I believe that people limit themselves with a mindset. Limitations of belief system.
But it's also exercise, it's habit. If you don't practice those things, of course you're limited. So it's just forcing people to practice these modalities. Of course we all have them, but they're unexercised, right?
Yeah. And a lot of people don't like to exercise.
You know, we all like to be in their comfort zone, so you know that, and I think the mixing, you know, when you talk about mixing entertainment and education, it's getting people out of their comfort zone gradually and doing it by motivating them, by making them think they enjoy it. This is sometimes called gamification, because it's the way we do so much learning now.
So I want to talk a little bit about, obviously, the book that's right now, loving the concept, you know, but it was what, 20 something years ago. Did you know that this book was going to become this much of a mainstream when you guys wrote it, or is this something that just happened?
Well, you know, it actually was a series of books. I mean, you know, the first big book that we wrote, which took a long time to write, was Generations. It's a whole different way of looking at social change, looking at history.
And when you say long time, how long did it take?
It took two of us 3 years. So we needed a big advance from a publishing company to be able to do that. We were lucky enough to get one.
So you went and asked for an advance and you were just a new writer.
Well, each of us had written a book before. Okay. You know, I had co-authored a book on sort of the future of the federal budget and entitlement systems, and my co-author had written a book on what boomers did during the Vietnam War, a book called Chance and Circumstance. So both of us had been sort of involved in subjects which had kind of a generational subtext. Anyone who looks at the federal budget knows that that's about age brackets, taking from certain ages and giving to other ages, right? We had a track record as writers, so we weren't completely new on this.
Okay.
But we were able to it was a compelling idea, and I think people thought that we might have the ability to pull that off. Anyway, it was an enormous research project, and it involved rethinking how the interaction of age and time. You know, when most people tell history, they talk about what everyone's doing in any given year. So you know, you have 1851, and here's what everyone's doing that year. And 1852, here's what everyone's doing that year, right? And typically you're focusing mainly on midlife parents and leaders because they're making most of the big decisions, right? And so you kind of go ahead that way. We had a very different way of looking at it. We said, why don't we track the same people over time, right? And so we call this the generational diagonal. You think of age on the y-axis, you think of time on the x-axis.
Okay.
And if you think of social change that way, we all live a diagonal line, right? We're all kind of growing older over time, right? So we all live a diagonal line. And a generation is a series of diagonal lines. And any given event is a vertical line through all those diagonals, hitting everyone at different ages, right? And our method is to follow the same people over time, not the same age bracket over time. See the difference?
Yeah.
The 19th century was a huge period of generational theorizing. Almost all of the great social writers, you know, whether it was Auguste Comte or Dilthey or John Stuart Mill or Ortega Gasset, all of them wrote a lot on generation. They're fascinated by the concept. Actually, in recent years, we have done less of it. You know, we tend to be much more specialized in the social sciences.
So that first book, was it immediate success?
It was very successful. But I guess what I'm trying to say is we laid the foundation for looking at things in a different way, because not only did we see that these generations are very different going back through history. This generational differences aren't just recent. You know, we think of like baby boomers and the greatest No, these generations have always been, generational differences have always been recognized and hugely understood by the people of the time. But actually these generations tended to arrive in a certain pattern. Certain types of generations always follow other types of generations. And they seem to have a sequence which is synchronized to some of the great turning points in American history. So this idea of a generational rhythm and a rhythm of moods in American history linked to these generational changes was a new discovery. This is not something that we originally started our research wanting to find out, but it's something where our research led us. And that became a kind of subtext or organizational structure underlying this generational history of America. And the book was Yeah, it was reasonably popular. We got a lot of, it was a lot of attention at the time.
So that time the publisher says, we want you guys to write more books, or?
Well, you know, we all had other lives. We had all other things to do. You know, book writing as a rule does not make people rich. So, you know, you always have to decide if you're going to write a book.
Well, you didn't do it for the money. You guys didn't do it for the money.
We didn't do it for the money, but it's a foundation, something you find fascinating. It leads you to other places. Ultimately, we decided, that came out in 1991, and that I think put the study of generations back on the map. In America, people began to talk about generations. This is the book in which we, you know, identified the millennial generation. We kind of gave that label, right? You know, kids born 1982 and after, and that was very early. I mean, the kids were only like, the oldest of them were 8 years old at the time, or 9 years old, you know, we were writing the book. So, and we made some predictions about them that I thought were pretty prescient in retrospect. You know, we predicted that they would be, as they came of age, they'd be, you know, closer to their parents, more risk averse, collectively confident about the future, more achievement oriented, a lot of these things that now we kind of say, oh yeah, that's kind of the way millennials are now, you know, different from Gen Xers, right. You know, back in the early 90s. And so now we take that for granted, but we forecasted it. And here's the thing, is the ability to look at generations historically is the ability to make non-linear forecasts about the future. Because you can predict how one generation shaped one way as they age is going to change the next phase of life that they enter. So by looking at these millennials and how differently they were being raised than Xers were, right? As kids, we could already anticipate, because we'd seen that kind of generation before, that when they finally came of age as, you know, 20-somethings, they were going to be completely different and redefine that phase of life. So that ability, and it's interesting, I can go into a corporation that sells cosmetics for 40-year-olds. And see, no one understands this. And I'll ask them, so how do you know what, you know, 40-year-old women will want 10 years from now? They said, we know everything about 40-year-old women. You know, we've studied it inside and out. We studied the history of 40-year-olds. And, you know, we've extrapolated all those trends forward about 40-year-olds. And that's how we know what the future is going to be. And I'll tell them, well, that's funny. You know, when I want to know about 40-year-olds 10 years from now, I look at today's 30-year-olds. Well, it's kind of obvious, right? Those are the 40-year-olds. Right? We don't want to follow the same people? Or do you want to follow this age bracket, which is just an empty space? Right. So everyone follows the empty space. Everyone follows the empty hotel room with different people moving in and out. So, but no one's following the people that's moving in and out.
When you live your life, do you see everything as a generation? Like when you walk out the door, you know, things happen. How do you see things?
I see it. So when I meet people, I have dinner with people, I
You don't immediately say, how old are you?
No, I usually have a pretty good impression of how old I am, and I kind of know from that what their childhood was likely to be like, how close they were with their parents, what happened to them at different ages, you know, and when I watch old movies, I know what kinds of generations were being portrayed, and when I look at young people today, you look at millennials today, I can sort of visualize how that same generational temperament, those same basic behaviors, goals in life, aspiration, will transform midlife leadership by the, you know, late 20s, 30s, early 40s, you know, when millennials are probably running this country. And so that allows me to make a prediction. So this is what I wanted to say, is that when I look at people, as I look at people, the younger I look at people, the more I'm looking into the future. Because I'm looking into how that group is going to be running the country. So as you begin to intuit what it is about them, it's sort of like looking at sedimentary layers in geology. You know, you look back, you know, you look further down, you're looking further into the past. But in generations, you look around you, as you look younger, you're looking into the future. And you look older, you're looking into our past. You're looking into how our country has been run. But tying that together is something we don't ordinarily do. If you ask most people about 20 years from now, the year 2037, it's like a science fiction to them. It's like, oh, I don't know, we'll all be flying saucers in Monterey. God knows, technology, maybe we're going to make a few guesses.
That's the main focus is technology.
But about the mood of the era, what kind of people will be running, what kinds of problems are we likely to have, given the kind of people who will be running, we know a lot. 20 years from now, it's going to be us, just 20 years older. It's going to be all of us moved up one phase of life, right? It's a huge amount you can tell from that. All the boomers who now occupy senior leadership roles will be gone. All the Xers who are moving into public life will be the senior leaders. Millennials will now be the new midlifers beginning to take over the top spots, right? And these little protected kids that we're raising, they will be coming of age. You can gain a picture, you can gain a mood picture of that, and you can kind of realize what the tone of public life will be like. Will we be, glutting out on personal consumption, or will we be building huge public infrastructure? Will we value family? Will we value community?
Are not only in the United States, it's across the world, right?
It's across the world. Since World War II and the Great Depression, there's been a huge overlap of much of the world, in terms of generational location in life. That era of the 30s, early 40s gave rise to huge civic generations around the world. They fought one side or the other World War II. They were the Long March generation in China. They gave birth to the People's Republic of China in 1948. The Great Partition generation in India that was so civically important. And so, throughout so much of the world, this is a huge civic generation. And the generation after them, in our country, we call them the greatest generation. Like Tom Brokaw giving them that big name. And a huge a generation of builders. These generations poured more concrete than any other generation in history, right? And they built all this stuff. And today we live in the civic shadow of this generation of real Promethean builders. The generation that came after them were the kids that grew up during the crisis. And so all over the world, we call them the silent generation. They were given that name in 1951 because they kept their heads down during the McCarthy era. They didn't want anything to go on their permanent records. Fortune magazine had a famous cover story in 1949 called The College Class of 49, and the subtitle was Taking No Chances, right? So that was the silent generation. Dutiful, play by the rules, very well behaved, very well socialized. Didn't want to do anything that would upset these huge achievements that have been built at such great cost by the generation right before them, right? And they've done very well. They've done very well economically. They now are so well off economically that they support their adult kids, right? They set up college funds for their great-grandchildren and all of that. So a lot of the money now is flowing down to these generations because the aging of wealth has been a very important part of what's happened recently in American life. So that's the silent generation. Boomers are a global phenomenon. Just as the silent generation were a global phenomenon, the silent generation gave rise to the European Union. All the great architects of the European Union, full of committees and rules and all these things to prevent people from going off too much in any one direction, making sure that there would never again be war in Europe. You can believe that the generation who experienced firebombing as children, so people like Helmut Schmidt and Jacques Delors and all the great architects of the European Union. One of the problems with the European Union now, why it's coming apart, is because the generation that built it has passed beyond leadership age. They're no longer in control. That makes sense. Now the boomers were a global generation as well. We know them as, Woodstock and the Summer of Love and maybe the Weathermen and, kind of the violent edge and protesters and inner city riots and all the rest. But in Europe, you had the same thing. And in the word used in Europe to describe this generation is 68 for the year 1968. So in France they call these les 68, the 68ers, die 68er in German. But these are the Baader-Meinhof gang. These are the Red Brigade in Italy. They brought really terrorism to Europe in the 70s. And they were a level of violent protest and particularly a level of terrorism was actually much more acute than it ever was in the United States. Today they've kind of aged into the Green parties of Europe. They tend to be the early wave especially, very socially progressive, filled with the same sense of high principle and so on that boomers here have. In China, this was the Red Guard generation that brought us the Cultural Revolution, right? During the late 60s, an attempt to expunge 3,000 years of Chinese history, get rid of Confucius and all that paternalistic junk and cleanse China of all this horrible stuff. And so that was, everywhere that sense of cultural revolution, values up people. And in fact, this pattern of awakenings has been periodic through the West. About once every lifetime, we have a huge awakening period. In about every human lifetime, we have a huge civic reconstruction period. So these are what we call, actually, in the terminology of the book we came out with in 1997, called The Fourth Turning, kind of the winter and summer of history, right? What we call, first turning, second turning, third turning, fourth turning. The second turning are the great awakenings of American history, which are a reconstruction of our inner life, our inner world, the world of values, religion, culture, right, art. And the fourth turnings are the reconstruction of our outer world, empire, politics, the economy, the big things, setting up of, Bretton Woods and the United Nations and the IMF and the World Bank and, conquering half the world, which America did in World War II, right? That's a fourth turning, right? Very different.
Right.
So boomers' parents came of age with D-Day. Boomers came of age with Woodstock. Wow.
What about Generation X?
What a difference. Generation X came of age with, Soundgarden and Kurt Cobain. A particularly dark period of the popular culture. It's interesting now, you ask millennials, their favorite music, and it's hard for them to name a lot of groups now from the 90s. That was kind of that unique, that was Gen Xers playing for Gen Xers in the 90s. By the early first decade of after 2000, it was Gen Xers playing for millennials. So the tone tended to lighten up. Today it's millennials playing for millennials. It's interesting, every decade you kind of have a different generation of performers and listeners. But 1990s was Xers playing for Xers, right? And that was dark. That was the heyday. It started off, particularly in the early 90s, with the two best known genres of that era were gangster rap and grunge. And there's a whole museum. You can go to Seattle, and there's a whole museum dedicated, the whole floor dedicated to the Seattle sound. So you can just go around and see the whole history of that. But that really reflected, the sensibility of Gen X. And there's a whole interesting story behind Gen X, but they are also belong to a certain generational type. And their type is characteristic of generations who experience the awakenings, not coming of age into adulthood like boomers, but as children. They are always left behind, discarded kids. They are always kids who are given enormous freedom to do anything they want and told, take care of yourselves, because no one's going to be around to take care of you. And it's interesting because now that Xers are managers and leaders, they don't really, that's one of the things I understand about millennials, is millennials are used to being taken care of and given structure and given feedback. And these Xers are always thinking, when I first started a job, no one gave a damn about me. They just kicked me to the curb, and I was expected to just figure it out myself. And if it didn't succeed, I just moved on to the next opportunity, right? And so they think that's normal. That's not normal. That was only normal for them. But they think, oh my gosh, history is like that since time immemorial. So what's the matter with these millennials? And it's interesting, when I go talk...
Isn't that the same thing that happens with basically all the generations?
Yes, and that's why whenever I go talk to a group, just a good example, say boomers and Xers, about how to, how to employer branding and recruit, manage and onboard and energize and motivate millennials, right?
Right.
I never just talk about millennials, because they wouldn't understand me. And so what the hell, why is this generation so different? Now, I don't get it. That makes, I always talk about their generation first.
That makes sense.
Because once they realized that their generation was unusual.
Yeah, once they're clear
Right.
that this is what it is, it makes sense.
And then they began to realize it's not just that millennials are different, it's that they were very different. Not the norm in history. No generation is the norm because every generation is sort of moving around, has kind of a different temperament, which is kind of exploring different corners of the possibilities, in that kind of spectrum of temperaments. Xers were a very unusual generation. And as they went into the workforce, they tended to reshape the workforce according to their own temperament. For example, cash out all those benefits. Give me a defined contribution, not a defined benefit pension plan, all those other things. I don't trust you, employer, to take care of me. Just cash it out. Give me the cash and let me walk out the door. And everyone said, yeah, that works better with millennials. Why the hell are we trying to take care of them? Let's just cash it out and let them do what they want. Or give them a huge number of the choices. Let them choose any choice they want and we don't care. They basically move it off our table. We don't care what they do with their lives. Let them make the choices, cash it out, whatever. And some of the best management gurus in the 1990s really absorbed that. Jack Welch, he used to say, who used to have a yank and rank program, so the bottom 10% he would fire every year, which is, Xers are great, they're fine with winners and losers, right? And he also used to say, I pay them at the end of the month, and at that moment we're even. Wow, is that it? I paid them at the end of the month, and at that moment we're even. Well, again, Gen Xers are great with that. I don't know any millennial who's okay with that.
No.
Right? Okay? They want to join a team. They want to join an enduring institution. Millennials want to join a team in which is more than the sum of its parts. Gen Xers don't understand anything that's more than the sum of its parts. That idea of community. So Gen X's idea is I amass a talents as an individual. It's kind of like a tool belt, where I'm putting little tools on my things. Exactly, and I learn these things, and I can take them with me anywhere I want to go.
I want to take you a little bit off of this topic. We've been very fortunate to actually spend time with you over the weekend and be a part of your family because we were able to actually see your brothers, and we really think that they're all strong and extremely smart. Is that the way it's always been because your parents helped you out, focused on you guys to grow and allowed you to be your own person? How did that work out?
Yeah, I had parents that were very comfortable with that, particularly my mother, who was, very patient and very willing for me to pursue whatever I thought was valuable. Very non-judgmental that way.
Because they all have the same.
All of them that way. Just kind of a disclaimer, I come from a family of physical scientists, so everyone I knew growing up was either a physicist or an astronomer. And so they tended to be very left-brained,
right?
Very quantitative, analytical, very secular, not a lot of religion in my background, and very patient in that analytical way. You're curious about the world in a very values-free way. I did learn that, and that was a great strength. But I did have my own rebellion in a way, which was I was more interested in culture, religion, history. I was interested in more the emotional side of the personality.
She was a rebel of family.
Well, in a way, because I came out east to go to graduate school to learn about those things. If you really want to study religion or history or culture, you don't stay in California.
Right.
Seriously, unless it's pop culture, but that's something completely different. California is all about physical sciences and IT and invention. It's not about the values side.
So even when you made that choice, your mom said, "Let me."
It's fine. Whatever I wanted to do.
Because my mother was the same way. She backed me up on anything that I decided to do, and I think that's important. The reason I'm saying that is because also I see you running your new life with your new family, and a lot of what you're saying that your mom did for you is the way you are. You're so kind-hearted. And I'm not just saying that because I'm here. I mean, the experience that we've had, the way that you treat your new children, the connection, it's just all real. And how does that work? Being not generation, but as a person.
It takes inner strength, but it also takes fortunate circumstances where you're allowed to be able to be that way. You know, it takes wonderful people around you. It takes finding a wonderful person to share your life with and to allow you to open up.
And you can't find a person unless you are the person to attract that person. You know, so
yeah, well, it's
I don't want to take credit for everything.
It's chicken and the egg, and you know, these things have to, because people by themselves, before they form these communities, are potential, they're unformed. So you see this in someone, but they're not there yet, because you're not there yet, because you haven't formed a community yet, right? So it's a magical process whereby these unformed entities come together and miraculously produce something. You know, Plato in the Phaedo, which is a fascinating dialogue, he actually has, you know, Plato is often relating myths. You know, this is kind of, you know, in the words of Socrates, and Socrates, I would say this philosophical truth, I have a myth that will illustrate this. But this idea that we get together and form unities, we're just incomparably greater than the individuals we were before. He has a myth in Phaedo, which he basically says at the beginning of time, you know, men and women were actually single entities, and we were severed at the beginning of time. And we're looking for a partner, right? We're looking for the one we were always intended to have. And I think it's interesting because it's a myth that gets at the fact that how else do you explain how much more we are together than what we were individually, unless you conceive that somehow we were intended, you know, this was intended to happen, sort of an intentionality, that the potential existed before it happened.
As a person, is that something they can feel or something that they know?
I think you feel it.
You feel it?
I think when you feel it, when you are in a great relationship or in a great community.
Yeah, society always says the immediate gratification. They want, you know, this is going to be the perfect relationship instead of why don't you wait to the perfect time comes.
But it's interesting too, because the entire society goes through periods when we are more than the sum of our parts, and then we go through societies of just generalized divorce. Everyone. So a great example of what we call a first turning in American history would be like the American High. America under the presidencies of Truman and Eisenhower and John Kennedy. You know, the so-called American High, very conformist society, great sense of social progress. Generally, people trusted big institutions. Everyone trusted government. Everyone had a great sense that we were moving forward in the future. And there was a wonderful sense in which America felt that we were more than the sum of our parts. I mean, individually, we may have been all these kind of conformist, corny individuals who all wore the same gray flannel suits and stuff. We weren't much individually, but together, we were this great nation. We were this great community. And during the 60s, during the Second Awakening, we all tired of that social discipline. We all wanted to individualize ourselves again. We wanted to throw off all of these obligations. So we had the inner city riots and the student riots and all of the cultural rebellion, the bra burning, and, you know, all of the super macho male gendered stuff that came out. And then finally we had tax revolts. I mean, whatever it was, whether it was in the culture, the economy, no one wanted to be obligated anymore. And then under Reagan, we kind of emerged in the third turning. The third turning is a time in which we feel great as individuals, but institutions now are weak and discredited. No one cares about who we are together. You know, the Reagan era was great. You know, it was a free agency. Remember, that was the birth of free agency, the unregulated marketplace. And Gen Xers love that. Gen Xers embrace that, right? That was where they were going to find their way, by harnessing their individual strengths as opposed to all of these bigger entities.
So how is a fourth turning going to be with Trump?
Forget about Trump for a second, okay. But just go to fourth turning. The fourth turning is when we all get remarried again.
That was great.
So, it is. Fourth turnings are eras of community and belonging because we have no other choice. These are periods of emergencies. These are periods of growing historical urgency. And it doesn't happen because we all sit down on a bright sunny day and just decide this is a good idea. It happens under a great deal of adversity. The typical in a fourth turning are financial crashes, economic depression, and war.
But that's scary when you say that, because we now know that we are in the fourth turning,
yes.
And you're saying all these things, and you've been right about all the other ones. So how should people handle this?
Well, here's how you handle it. You handle it by coming to the recognition that every season is necessary.
Right.
There's a season for planting, there's a season for harvesting, there's a season during the winter when things die off so that new seeds can grow.
Right.
We know that. We know in nature that rivers have to flood occasionally, to take out all the junk that's in the riverbed. Forests have to have these huge fires occasionally to burn off all the underbrush and allow the new seed. Every process in nature has these periodic periods of cleaning out. Human societies are no different. There has to be periods when everything that over time, over a period of peace and complacency, all our institutions which increasingly become ossified and dysfunctional and ineffective, right? And everyone grabbing their own little piece of the pie, and all these little communities of renters and lobbyists, and everyone taking it becomes increasingly complex and privileged for those who have it. There has to be a period when that gets wiped clean and the whole system tilts no longer so much to the rich and the old, but the young and those who don't have assets, don't have money. Nothing like a 50% decline in the S&P 500. And people always talk about the S&P 500 is just a price. That's all it is. It's not good if it's high or bad if it's low necessarily. It's just a price. It's the price of how much do you value the earnings generated by the current institutions we have relative to those we don't have yet. And very often a high value for the S&P 500 or for our current institutions that are generating value is simply a reflection of how little we expect from the future, how little is possible from the future. So sometimes a decline in assets is a way for the young to buy in more cheaply into the American dream. And it also reflects the fact that the rate of return on new ideas has suddenly risen. So here's what I would say. The fourth turning is a time in which we can solve huge problems, which earlier it seemed insoluble. We went into the 1930s, first we had the crash, right. Then we had the huge jacking up of tariffs, the implosion of world trade, then we had the rise of fascism around the world, and then we had Germany, on the loose, and Italy, and so we had multiple problems which were all vicious cycles feeding each other in a horrible direction. By the end of that period, we thought it wasn't just winning the war. It was doing all of the things necessary which we could have only done in a fourth turning because we had completely mobilized American society at that point, right? To solve all the problems. That's why we founded the UN and the IMF and Bretton Woods and the World Bank. It was going to provide a whole new global geopolitical infrastructure to provide peace for decades to come, solving these huge problems like tariffs and providing a new basis of fair trade around the world to prevent future outbreak of war. We talked earlier about the European Union, was an attempt to do that in Europe. So here's my point, is that right now where we can't do anything seemingly as a democracy to solve even the most minor problems, much less to focus on any of these big future problems. So the real issue I would suggest is, don't be scared if we have a fourth turning. Be scared if we don't. Be scared if we're locked into this complete inertia and we totally lose faith in democracy. I mean, I've been actually tracking lately, there are a number of researchers from Harvard now who are looking at declining faith in democratic institutions by younger people, particularly millennials, all over the world. The share of young people who say that they would support an authoritarian leader, that they don't really trust democracy. Who are the societies in the world now that seem to actually focus on long-term problems? Xi Jinping, China. Or maybe Narendra Modi in India, but he represents this new populist, more authoritarian mode. Vladimir Putin has approval ratings in Russia that any of our leaders would die for, right? And so this raises a real crisis. We better hope we have a successful fourth term, because if we don't, the future is going to belong to these kinds of regimes, and people will completely lose faith. I mean, look at what's going on now in our country. We're here in Washington, D.C., right? So right down the road here is where they're supposed to be making decisions. Donald Trump can't even get a budget through Congress, a Republican budget, despite the fact that he has Republicans majorities in both the House and the Senate. He still can't get it, much less get through his own populist program. I think actually one of the problems Trump has now is that the stock market's too high. He needs a crack. He needs something. Something's going to happen to allow some leader, whether it's Trump,
because of the turning point.
Exactly. And so whether it's Trump or whether it's some bipartisan group, come the midterm elections in 2018, or come a massive new resurgency in 2020, possibly by populists on the other side of the aisle, on the Bernie Sanders side, right? We saw the same thing in France just a few weeks ago, where it was the right wing and the left wing populists almost overwhelmed in the first vote, almost gave France no other choice. Came very close to that. And instead you got this guy, Emmanuel Macron, who was able to finally get and he has this narrow, only 25% of the French voted for that guy. This moderate in the middle, he has no mandate, and he's saying is stranded in the middle. France needs a fourth term. All of these societies need something.
But usually the fourth turning comes for the rest of the world after we've gone through it. That's what
certainly. It does depend. Interestingly, the Great Depression, the first financial crash, was actually a bank in Austria. I mean, these things are global, and they're all connected. I do agree that there would be nothing like a very bad recession or a crash in the United States to hugely impact the rest of the Europe. I would say less so Europe and Japan, but hugely the emerging markets. I mean, nothing like a recession in the U.S., a crash, a very high dollar, to absolutely hammer the emerging markets, possibly China as well. So you're right, they are connected, and one tends to affect the other, no question about it.
And how long is it going to last?
We're not quite halfway through. So, we started in 2008, full generation, we don't know exactly, but a full generation is 22 years. So we're looking all the way till 2030. So I suspect the next 4 years are going to be difficult ones, and the rest of that decade is a time when we're going to start what we call regeneracy, which is actually beginning to mobilize America again around new institutions in which we have reviving trust.
The next 4 to 6 years is where...
Next 4 to 6 years I think are absolutely crucial, yeah.
So what do you recommend for people to prepare? Besides reading your book, obviously.
Well, you can always make that. That's a relatively minor investment. There are a lot of things you can do. I would say, brace your personal finances and your personal life. Make sure you're well diversified, know where your savings are. Don't be a momentum investor. I think that's a very bad thing right now. I'm very worried about the vast numbers of people in plans who are now in passively invested index funds who are basically just riding momentum.
And liquid way, make sure you have liquid.
Well, make sure you have liquidity. Make sure you have. Make sure your investments are spread around the world, so you have at least some diversification globally. Different kinds of assets. Obviously, as we know, bonds, particularly dollar-denominated bonds, are much more storm-worthy than equities. But I'm really worried about the people who are invested in, just S&P indexes, which have driven the S&P to such incredible valuations now, particularly millennials. This is the irony with millennials. Millennials are risk averse, right? So they don't like to invest in stocks. Oh my gosh, buy a stock, that's really dangerous. So they all invest in these things called target date funds, which are designed by, financial wizards, and they seem like, target date funds do nothing but invest in a kind of passive index fund full of equities. So it's basically just millennials are all invested in the market, usually in a passive indexed way. What it means is
also doing the Bitcoin thing. That's the
that remains such a tiny corner of the market now, and the people that are doing that are mainly, Gen Xers on the borders of legal and illegal. It's out there. Typically, Bitcoin's now being used strongly by people who want to get their money out of a country. So
legalized laundering.
Well, about a year ago and a year and a half ago, I think it's still strong, but almost over 90% of Bitcoin usage was Chinese trying to get assets out of China, because of course China has huge, controls on capital exports now. But and of course it was used on this recent cyber attack, right?
Right.
But one of the reasons why we had this huge surge in Bitcoin usage, the cyber attack basically asked everyone, if you want to recontrol any of the data on your computer, give us $300 in Bitcoin. Remember that? That was the thing. So Bitcoin is always going to be fringe because government can't tax it, which means government can't make a legitimate, no currency will be allowed to survive.
Because that currency wasn't created for growth, so eventually it's going to have an issue.
I do think with regard to you say, how can you prepare? I think just beyond financial, I think it's know your community, because in every fourth turning, everyone turns back to their community. They turn back to their friends. They turn back to say, if you're a boomer who never had any children, forgot to have any children,
marry some of the children.
Well, marry some of the children, or form an intentional community with others. Yeah. Find a community. Find a group that you.
But it's so hard nowadays because a lot of people have separated from that. I live in several of my homes, neighborhoods. You don't talk to your neighbors. Unless something bad happens.
But did I tell you, fourth turnings are when we all refined ourselves as members of a community. Frederick Lewis Allen, who wrote the books, he wrote a famous book called, Only Yesterday, and then there was another book he wrote on the 30s, but a famous book in the 1920s and 30s. And he said, in the 30s, after all the wildness of the 20s, he said the 30s were the decade of community and belonging. Everyone wanted to belong to something. It was in short story fiction, it was local color fiction. People went around and actually wrote short stories about the various localities in America. You had those WPA murals, which reflected sort of the local communities in every area in America, or the NRA, which was the new National Recovery Administration, which actually had uniforms and badges. During the 30s, everyone wanted to wear a badge and a uniform because it meant they were a member of a group. So that idea of community, which certainly millennials are at the cutting edge of that today, is making a comeback. So this is also important. This is a lesson of history. In a time of historical urgency and huge volatility politically, financially, economically, and with the danger of enormous geopolitical shockwaves moving through the system, community is what you want. You don't want to be leveraged. You want to have community. You want to be well diversified, and you probably want to, if you have millennial kids, or if you have Homelander kids, the kids coming after them, you want to make sure that they are fully engaged in the community. I sometimes tell that to a lot of these boomers and Xers, particularly Xers today, who are homeschooling their kids, and say homeschooling's fine, but make sure they know their community, because generational membership and being able to get along with peers is going to be very important.
Even on the digital era, the age that we're in right now, that everybody's...
Well, it's interesting because one of the things millennials have done is they've turned digital technology, which in the 1990s was always about individuating the culture and allowing each individual to be empowered to, get any of the media or songs or TV they wanted. It was millennials who actually thought of the idea of using IT to bring together communities. Social media, that was a millennial invention. That was Mark Zuckerberg.
That's right.
And you see Zuckerberg today. He just gave an address at Harvard. He gave the commencement address to the kids. And he was just hammering it home again and again. Purpose and community, purpose and community. It was very generational too. He talked about millennials and how there was this sense of purposeful community that we're trying to bring to America and by extension the world. I think a revived interest in creating new public spaces, which we saw in this last election. Every candidate figured out talking about infrastructure was very popular, right? Donald Trump certainly, Bernie Sanders and even Hillary picked up on it after a while, right? Talking about infrastructure. Again, this is being driven by millennials to some extent. Millennials don't spend much time in their own, micro apartments or wherever they're staying. They spend time in public spaces with each other.
Even though society doesn't believe that because of the social media concept, but yeah, it's true.
Well, actually, you look at them. They go out and they share movies together in hotel lobbies. You look, for instance, in a particular core urban area where millennials live. Their apartments are so tiny you can't spend much time there. So they're congregating with each other in hotel lobbies and sports bars and coffee shops, and they're watching their movies there. They're congregating there. The Boomer and Xer idea was much more to retreat to your own apartment, which is much more lavishly set out. I talk to people on boards of hotels now, and they tell me 20 years ago, every new dollar in CapEx is going into improving the rooms in our hotels, right? Making those, add jacuzzis, add all these creature comforts. Now, so with millennials, forget it.
Yeah, we're just all going in, and it's set up that way.
It's all going into lobbies.
Mm-hmm.
It's all going into
or
the public
rooftops.
areas.
Go ahead and,
wherever it was, where they were
exactly
congregating publicly. It's no longer going into the personal private spaces. Mm-hmm. But that's my point. I said, millennials are very much attuned to why the hell can't we change just the overall public infrastructure? Our use of land. Why you have to drive everywhere? I mean, you live in most of America, you're in a strip mall. You literally can't get out and walk anywhere. Who the hell designed that? Well, we designed that right after World War II, our last fourth turning. It seemed like a great idea at the time, and it was pretty good. Suburbs, big shopping malls and all that. But again, every fourth turning we come out with a new concept. Increasingly so much, even to solve our economic problems. We need public solutions, we need political solutions. Our productivity of our economy now and our standard of living growth is not limited by robotics and AI and a lot of the stuff people talk about. How inexpensively can we make all the little gadgets we buy? Because those are already pretty cheap. It's limited by what most Americans do today. They're working in healthcare, education, social services, retail, government. I mean, that's where most Americans are today. And for most of these things, I'd say particularly healthcare, education, social services, and government, we need a public makeover. You can't do that through markets. You need a new kind of constitution of how we're going to do this, right? That's just not something an entrepreneur can come launching into. I mean, what's wrong with our healthcare system? It's so bad, it's so dysfunctional. We pay for so much that doesn't really improve your care, right? You improve your health. It's all like various levels of acute care intervention, which really isn't what you need. You need a new lifestyle. You need other ways of running your life. We don't have a system that provides that today, and there's no small reform that's going to solve that, that's going to reorient our kind of medical industrial complex. Again, that has to be a big public solution. But again, I come back to the fact that that's what fourth turnings do. They allow you to make that big changes.
The big shift.
Yeah, big shifts.
What is it like to be married to a millennial?
Unexpected. It's interesting, I said earlier that looking down the age ladder, you look into the future. And particularly looking at kids who are homelanders, kids who are in grade school today. You're looking ever further into the next leadership, the next group of leaders and parents who are going to be, running America. Right. So I find it fascinating and energizing. I find with little kids, a lot of people think little kids, my gosh, they require so much care and work and but I always think you're looking at these kids, you're looking further out and what's to come. And I have a sense of wonder about that because I always want to know what's to come. I think we all do.
How do you stay so young? Because you really do not act your age. This vibe, the energy. How do you stay there?
I guess I would say that I stay curious. By the way, the first thing when I met my wife, is the first thing I told her when we had our first date, is I said, there's one thing about me that you have to know, first of all, just straight off the gate, because some people really don't care much about that, and I have to know that right away. I said, if there's one thing that defines me, I'm curious about everything. I want to know how everything works. I want to know, no matter what it is, whether it's people, communities, politics, leaders, what's happening abroad, the markets, the chemistry abroad, whatever it is, I want to know how it works. I'm endlessly fascinated.
Great.
So I think curiosity to me is what keeps me young. If I weren't curious, I'm not sure I would care, about living. It's the old line from Socrates, right? The unexamined life is not worth living. And to me, that's true. The only reason that makes life interesting to me is I get to learn more about it and how all the relationships work. Anyway, it's a sense of endless fascination.
I love that answer.
I get up every day and I'm just endlessly curious. I think there's one more thing I'm going to learn today. And very often, when other people are standing in lines, they're standing in lines for, a plane ticket or Starbucks, everyone's sitting there fuming. They're saying, oh my God, why can't I move on? And it's great. I have time to think about a few ideas. I've been wondering how they relate to each other. So I can actually just contemplate stuff in my mind. I can kind of think through a problem that I haven't had time to think about. So I can do that actually, and I can enjoy just being in a room and thinking about something. Where I have a whole bunch of things that I learned about, and somehow it doesn't quite sync. They're inconsistent in different ways, and I want to kind of figure out how to tell a consistent story with these different things. So time off, I'm just able to kind of just spin that out, think about it a little bit, run through scenarios.
Well, in closing, any advice for, let's go through each generation, any advice for the baby boomers?
We know Peter Townsend of the Howe, used to, had that famous song called, My Generation.
I love it.
Right. And at the end of it, he talked, it was a great ode to his generation of all the great enlightenment he gave. And at the end of it, he took the guitar and he smashes it, right? He now does a different rendition of that song, where he says, he does my generation and so on. At the end of it, he says, sorry world, I guess we really f***ed it up. That's how he ends it. And then he doesn't
smash the guitar.
Doesn't smash the guitar anymore. And I think there's a lot of that realization. By the way, every prophet archetype in history has that arc. They come of age during the awakening, where they basically destroy stuff. They basically destroy institutions, liberating the individual, but destroying institutions. And toward the end of that arc of life, they always come to terms with the fact that, oh my God, what have we done? We don't have those institutions. How are we going to make it through? So they often become what I call in our work the great champion. They become the repository of older wisdom to try to lead young people to rebuild. And so I think that's their highest mission right now, is to help millennials. Millennials are great in banding. So we got boomers. That's what they're going to do. They're going to teach. X's is the cleanup crew. They've always known that. They always come along just after the party. When the beach is just all strewn with junk, the boomers had all the fun and they come to the beach. That feeling of coming to the beach after the party. So X's have always had that sense. Everyone had a great time until they came. Silent, the boomers made huge amounts of money in the 80s and 90s, in bonds and stocks. Xers come along and get all the huge market crashes after buying late into the market, right? All of that sense of cleaning up. Boomers will be the visionaries and giving the big picture, but the Xers will be the ones actually making the high-level strategic decisions. They will be the most critical generation in the fourth turning, because they will be the ones whose decisions are actually making the difference between life and death, and survival or demise of our country. I mean, their decision make critical because of their phase of life during this rapid period of his historical change. Millennials, their mission will be to band together, form a great cohesive community, both in their local lives, but also as a national community, and give a new sense of cohesion a new sense of unity to this country, and bring a new sense of temperance and restraint and patience to leadership when they finally begin to come of age. A new rationalism, perhaps, reining in the passions that boomers have brought, to the leadership years. I think they will be a moderating generation when they finally come to power. They will be wonderful achievers. And I think even the optimism of this generation, no matter what happens to millennials, they remain very optimistic collectively about the future. And I think that will be ultimately the tide when we come out of the fourth turning, which is when the first millennials are really beginning to sort of finally become known publicly. That's going to be infectious. And the coming first turning will be one of great public optimism, and that's when they finally get to build all their big infrastructure and create these wonderful garden cities of the future that we all hope to finally do. That will be the golden age coming after the crisis. Every golden age needs a crisis, right? That's when we have our golden ages, and that will be millennials who will take charge at that golden age.
And then the last one?
And the last generation, the homelanders.
And I want to make sure, since you coined the word millennials, we're going to coin the word homelanders.
We'll coin the word homelanders. We ourselves didn't coin it. We actually did a survey of our readership about 8 or 9 years ago, and homelanders was the winning entry. So we just went with what our readers gave us. But they will be the suffocated, protected kids raised by, largely Gen X parents who are sort of setting the tone for child rearing in this era, letting their kids do nothing dangerous, and they will be a very well-behaved generation. They will follow the rules. They will say thank you. They will do all those nice, just like the silent generation did growing up. And they will be the helpmates. They will be the people helping the millennials, right? Build everything. They will be the new experts of this new world.
All over again.
Right. Yeah, it's going to begin all over again. And later on, that early...
Maybe the music will be better, too.
Well, the early conformity will actually be a burden to the homelanders. So later on, they'll have their own midlife crisis. And that will be in the next awakening, which will be a new period of sort of cultural revival, cultural explosion. So you can only look forward to that.
Well, Neil, thank you so much. It's been a privilege and an honor, and looking forward to doing more things with you.
Great.
So thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this interview, and I hope it gives you a new perspective on the time that we're living in and how to relate to all the generations of today, yesterday, and tomorrow. My name is Bert, Oliva, and remember to live life and don't let life live you. I will see you next week.
We hope you enjoyed this H-Code webinar. Don't forget to log in or sign up for your membership to access the online membership center, where you can see all lesson replays, download the homework, RSVP for future sessions, and much more. You can even ask for help or request a topic that you think would be interesting to our members. Are you ready to get started? Log into our website and sign up.